Welcome back. Today's video is going to be on working out the bugs on the TS200R that I found in the previous video on the first brief test ride. So let's get started. In regards to the way the bike runs, down low with the carby there seems to be way too much fueling going on. Either the pilot jet's been replaced with something too big, the screw is too many turns out, or the main jet and the carburetor's worn such that even with the slide closed there's still a bit of fuel coming through. I see that often in older worn carbies as well.
The fuel level with the float inside the carby might be a bit too high too, because I noticed you use a little bit of the fuel just by revving and the idle is higher, and then you leave the bike for a while and the idle slowly dips down. So I'm thinking the idle mixture might be going too rich because the fuel level in the float being too high. Now listen to the change.
I'm just going to sort out the issue with the float bowl first. I'll probably set it to book spec. If I remember correctly, the airbox boot going onto the carburetor is an absolute pain to put back on. The components in the bike have moved around a bit. I don't know what happened to this bike in the past 28 years, but things don't seem to line up as well as they used to, so we'll just have to work things out and try and do the best work I can. This is a JIS screwdriver, not a standard Phillips. You can see the wear on the slide here, how the black coating's worn off. Now I have cleaned this carby before, so it should be relatively clean inside. That's why I'm not worried about dirt causing my running issues. I think it's just something with the setup. So here's our needle and seat. Plenty of videos about this already, but that's the valve that turns the fuel on and off to the carby when it's at the correct level. And that is setting too late for us. So according to this, the floats are 0.6 of a millimeter out of spec. So that basically confirms that the fuel level is too high. So we fix that by bending this tab. Something else important to note is that there's a little bit of cracking on this side of the floats around where the steel is pressed into the plastic. This can actually leak, so what I'll do is I'll put the floats into liquid for a while, see if they fill up or if there's any bubbles. And if they do, that means they either need to be repaired or replaced. Well, I've got the carby apart. I'm going to have a look at the numbers on the jets, just so I can compare them to stock and what people have done to this carby over the years. There's a good chance they could be drilled too. 42.5 on the pilot jet. The main looks like a worn 170. Different brands have different jets, so this is 170 Mikuni. This is a Mikuni carburetor. Now before I go any further, I'll do the test that people like to do, which is blow through the fuel inlet with the carburetor normal and inverted. When the carburetor is inverted, the needle should be closed, and when it's standing up straight, it should be open. Go get another cleaner bit of hose to do that. So open. Yep. And closed. Yep. So now that I've changed the fuel level in the float bowl, I'll also put the idle mixture adjustment back to book spec. I found the specs for the jets. The main jet is correct, but the pilot jet, which I was suspecting was too big, is supposed to be 35, and in the carburetor, or in my carburetor, it is 42.5. So that confirms my suspicions that the carby was overfueling down low. Not sure why someone would put a larger pilot jet in, other than as like a protection measure, so if they engine brake a fair bit, the bike's a little bit less likely to heat and wear. But that does seem a bit extreme as a size difference. Well, as luck would have it, I found a crusty old 35 pilot in the bottom of an ice cream container. So I'll give it a clean and put it in. Okay, so I'm going to put a little bit of oil into the float bowl of the carby, just because the oil line that I had to take off from the side of the carby emptied a little bit. So it'll run a bit rubbish to start off with, but it should clear up. Okay, so before I get too carried away and put the seat on, I'm just going to do a test start to see if the thing will even run properly. I have to reconnect the fuel hose first though, obviously. If you see fuel starting to come out of the bottom of the carby, obviously the needle and seat's not working. And there she blows. But this is a common problem that's easy to fix. I suspect the oil I put in the carby's done that. See, getting all worked up over nothing. Okay, so the fumes have mostly gone. Doesn't matter if it catches fire, there's only about 3,000 fire extinguishers in the area. We will actually have to use the choke now, seeing as it's back to the stock lean jet. Sounds good to me. I'm going to put the seat back on now. Okay, so while I've been mucking around with the power valve, I'm trying to find the specs for how it should be set, seeing as the cables that lead to it are adjustable. The bike had a bit of an accident. The needle that belongs in the needle and seat had a groove worn in it, and when that happens you're supposed to replace them. I might have a replacement part already, so I'll have to have a look. For the moment I'm just going to put some hoses on where there should have been hoses already. I should have done this before I put everything back together, just to make sure the fuel drains away from the bike and that there's less fire risk. Okay, so the bike seems to be running better now all through the rev range. However, I've noticed if the bike is idling for a while or you spend a bit of time not accelerating, the bike seems to go rich again, so I don't think the needle and seat's sealing properly. There was a groove in the needle when I put it back into the seat. I did notice it, but I figured it seemed to be sealing okay before. However, it doesn't seem to be the case. So I'm going to see what I have for needles, see if I have one that'll fit. In the meantime, I have added an overflow hose coming off of the expansion tank. I also disconnected a wire that was widely believed on the internet to be a restriction wire. I think what it's done is it's made the power valve open a little bit earlier, so I still have all the top end, it's just the power is a bit more twitchy down low. Righto, so the new brake pads have showed up, sintered of course, plenty of meat on those, so now I just have to strain this thing onto its stand. I'll get these installed and we'll be able to give it a proper ride then. If the axle nut's tight, you really should do it before you put it on the stand, but I seem to be able to undo it okay just with 2 spanners, so I got away with it this time. Okay, so before I go any further, I'm just going to put a little disclaimer. I don't warrant that what I do on this channel is actually correct. I'm not qualified to say whether or not something is the correct procedure. So what I'm doing now is showing what I do to replace brake pads, not what you should do. If I just happen to be following the correct procedure, well, that's how it is. If I'm not, I'm not. Looks like we're halfway between the high and low mark. Upon inspection, the caliper seems to still have its factory shims, so there's no problems there. I've put a thin coating of anti-seize on the pins. Well, I thought I was recording putting the wheel on. Turns out I wasn't. You haven't missed much, it's only just reversing what I did to take it off. Okay, so everything's back together. I'm now going to pump the rear brake pedal a few times after screwing the reservoir lid back on, of course, and that should engage the brake pads and we should have rear brakes. I've already replaced the fluid and bled the system, so it should be alright. Everything seems to be clamping correctly. Okay, so it's going to take a while for the new pads to bed into the surface of the disc. Usually what happens is there's like an uneven wear pattern on the disc. You usually end up with some grooving going on. So it'll take a while for the pads to make full contact. Not that worried about it yet because this is a rear brake. It locks up pretty easy. Front brakes seem to work okay, so I think the bike will be alright for now, for me anyway. So in regards to the needle and seat issue before, I put the needle into a drill and then spun it with some wet and dry fine grit sandpaper. I noticed that the groove was still just in the rubber part of the needle. It hadn't gone all the way down to the metal, so I just took out the groove and now the needle seems to be seating just fine. There's no fuel leaking going on. Okay, so I just topped off the radiator, 50% coolant and water obviously. I guess now is the moment of truth. I can ride it properly now that I have brakes on both front and rear. I will admit I'm a little bit nervous. I had this bike completely pulled down into parts bins. I've been through every single component myself and every single bolt. So I guess now I just have to trust myself that everything's done properly, and I still have to put some hose clamps on here just to hold the gator up a bit higher. It looks silly like that. But hopefully everything runs smoothly. Anything could happen. I'm not going to ride the bike really hard at first. I'm also nervous because everything in Australia seems to be out to get you. That includes kangaroos, and there's plenty of them where I'm going to be riding, so got to keep an eye out, even though they camouflage pretty well. And they do like to hop out right at the last second from hiding in the shrub. But it is what it is, it's all part of the fun. I'm not a aggressive rider. I used to be, but then some certain things happened that slowed me down, and I'm not the type to fly down straights on a trail. I prefer to take my time and just accelerate out of the corners. Anyways, enough procrastinating. Okay, so after that ride, a couple of new things have popped up. The engine is pinging when accelerating hard under load. I believe the fuel I've got in the tank. The engine is rated to be able to use. However, what the engine isn't rated to use is the spark plug that's in it at the moment. When I got the bike, it had a B8ES, so I replaced it with a new one. After looking in the book, this engine is actually designed for a resistor plug, so it should have a BR8ES. So that's what I think might be causing the pinging. However, you may also notice that there's coolant sprayed all around the radiator area. Though I have been known to do this myself, it wasn't me this time. Unfortunately, this is evidence of another issue. Engine and radiator are almost completely room temperature now, but I'm going to demonstrate something. I wouldn't recommend starting bikes like this if it kicks back and you're not in the right spot. Leg damage can occur. The bubbles in the radiator are indicative of a leak through the head. There is compression leaking into the radiator system. This can either be the head gasket or the head itself is warped from overheating. I don't want to point any fingers, this is just a hunch, but this engine, the previous owner had it re-sleeved, and it's very possible that the top end's been reassembled with the original O-rings and gaskets. They haven't been replaced, and therefore the top end is now leaking compression into the circulation system. I'm not too depressed about it though, because this is both good and bad. It is bad because now I have to pull the thing apart and find out what's happened and possibly spend more money on it, but it's a good thing because that means the bike's not performing at its 100% potential yet, so we might even end up with even more power. It also could help solve the random mixture issues. When I let the bike idle, the mixture goes all over the place. Rich, lean, up, down, left, right. Originally I thought this was the needle and seat and the float height, but I measured that and it was pretty close to spec, and then I corrected it and it's still doing the same thing. If the needle and seat were leaking to the point where the engine was going rich, if I left it, it should eventually start coming out of the overflow, and it doesn't. So that makes me believe that the needle is actually seating, at least when the bike is stationary. Work I've done on my XR400, I've found that changing compression can actually require a change in mixture, and the randomness of the compression of this engine, because it's leaking into the radiator system, is making the idle mixture seem unsteady. So next episode, finding what the problem is, if I need a new head or just a simple gasket problem, or just a couple of O-rings. Anyways, thank you for watching and listening to my rambling. I guess I'll stop now and get to work on the next episode. Catch you next time.